So here we are talking about monastic life. So I thought I would share some of the things that I felt were important. And actually, maybe the title of this talk is a few of my favorite things, because these are some things that came to mind. And I was trying to really focus mostly on monastic life and not just like living here. But the two for me are completely united. So it's hard to separate them out. But I think the thing that comes to mind is that we have the opportunity to explore the Four Noble Truths. And I think this is like the most important thing in a way, because we all experience our suffering, but then we can also experience and start to learn about our potential. And I think it's so helpful to hold those two together and not let one go without the other. When earlier years living here, I've been having conversations with people here and brought to mind little phrases I would say to myself, like, I can either suffer or change. And that was how I helped myself, actually. And then another one was, if I'm suffering, I'm deluded. And I think the reason this helped me is because I also trained myself to perceive, to say to myself, I'm perceiving harm. I think that when learning here, one thing I learned is to actually take responsibility for what is my responsibility and not take so much responsibility for things that actually aren't. And that when I was doing that previously in my life, I was actually not taking responsibility for myself in a proper way, in a useful way. It's kind of like the easy way out. You're just going to be the one who can be functional, and you're just going to function or something, whatever you're doing, whatever identity, whatever you have to, whatever way you're propping yourself up. For me, I think I came here as a, they call that, a people pleaser. That gets kind of shut down because you learn pretty soon the suffering it's creating. And that actually, when you start seeing that a lot of your suffering comes from our excessive self-concern, you actually see that you're actually not trying to please people because you're caring about them, you know? So you're creating yourself all this suffering by kind of shooting yourself in the foot by the way you're living your life. And so to me, the Four Noble Truths are what help us to get out of that. And it ties into me in terms of monastic life with one of our missions here, which is to have a place where monastics can be trained. And it has a purpose, which is to create peace in a chaotic world. This recognizes both our potential to have more peace of mind and our difficulty of living, of the dukkha that we experience, that we all experience when we stop and look. So basically, the job description of a monastic, I would say, is to spend your time, whether you're on the cushion or off the cushion, because it's one flow between one and the other. It's one day that you're moving from one to the other and trying to take what you do on the cushion and bring it off the cushion. What happens off the cushion, on the cushion. It's one big flow. And you're trying to train yourself in the three higher trainings, which you've heard like this morning a lot about: ethics, which is non-harm, and then concentration and wisdom. And in some of the conversations I've had with people here this week, I realized that some of the ways I started to learn solutions to some things we talked about. Like this morning, we talked a little bit about doubt. Doubt is going to come up. These things come up. If you're actually traveling this path where you're swimming upstream against the culture, against your family, against your habituations, against your predispositions, against your habits, against everything, and then you learn some of the things in the Buddhist teachings, it's natural for doubt to come up. But what we have to do is we have to learn how to work with all these states of mind that aren't serving us. And that's what I love about the trainings in ethics, concentration, and wisdom, but when you do those, you actually start learning all of those things. And the way that I see it here, the way I see it manifest, is I see a lot of growth in people that live here, people that visit here, even our teachers. Everyone grows. This is the one thing that's beautiful about monastic life. It's set up for this purpose with all the supports that we need. So it's a very rich environment. And what that means is that you've got like a container, which includes things that we all rail against, like the schedule and like each other and like whatever, all these things that come up for us. But when we have this kind of situation, I find that a lot of times so many times remember saying to myself, I can do better than this. Like learning, when I get to the point where I was able just to see my mistakes and not waste so much time around those mistakes with all the other things that come up, like shame or self-recrimination or self-hatred or anger towards myself or anger towards other, all the things that we do, it's just really, it's a big waste of time. And so because we do purification practices here, we do this twice a day, and we learn how to like psychologically unburden ourselves in this way. But this actually helps us to grow spiritually because, one, we're literally learning what is going to be virtuous and successful, meaning how did the Buddha figure out what was virtuous? He saw what brought happiness, and then what was non-virtuous, he saw what brought suffering, and he worked backwards. And the first number of years I lived here, I had to work backwards too. I didn't know what these afflictions were. I didn't know when they were in my mind. I had to like figure out, what does this word mean? Where is this in my experience? And then you're at that phase where you see all the dirt, but you don't have any tools. And you have to suffer through that phase. But the thing is when you're surrounded by people who are like able to help you, when you have good spiritual friends, then you can make progress. And that's the one thing I really felt quite good about when I was thinking about this talk, because actually I have a lot more conviction than I had previously in this path. And it comes from just day by day, one problem after another, one mistake after another, one failure that you then pick yourself up and keep going, one fear after another, and you just keep going. And then you have, so the one thing I want to say that I think is wonderful about monastic life is that we have the teachings. When we first lived here, there weren't that many teachings because there was really nobody to teach. But when you have a community, there's people to teach, and now we are like flooded with teachings. And the other thing that we have the opportunity to do here, because earlier in my life I was kind of like skimming the surface, looking at these different traditions and this and that, and I realized at one point I have to go deep in one thing to actually penetrate anything. And here we have the opportunity to do that. And we have for me, it happens to be a practice tradition and philosophical tradition that resonates with me. This is going to be different for different people, obviously. But no matter who you are, if you just skim the surface, you'll never be able to go deep. You'll never be able to stay with something long enough to learn the ins and outs of it. I remember years ago, Venerable told a young man who came here, I think this was before I was in robes, that something is not just being a doctor to your mind, but learning to have finesse with working with your mind. Like, we're kind of clunky at first. We can't first recognizing our afflictions, and then we don't know what to do with them, and then we don't know which antidote works, and then we don't even know how to get our minds calm enough that we can even think about using an antidote. There's just so much to learn. These are my learnings. I've had to learn all these things. But we have the teachings that allow us to penetrate these things. We have the retreat, so we can actually do what is the Buddhist way of learning, which is to study and kind of hear and learn about things and then contemplate them so you understand the meaning. And that takes a long time, and that's why it's great to have people to talk to ask questions of, to debate, and then contemplate on the cushion, and then actually come to some kind of understanding and then meditate on that so you can reformat the hard drive, so you can change yourself. And the other wonderful thing about living here, so maybe just to back up, we usually do a 3-month retreat every winter. Sometimes we interrupt it with Vania teachings. And that's the next thing I want to talk about. We have the Vania Rites as monastics. And those are um, I'd say like this, on paper, they don't really look like much. But when you live them, they're like amazing. You live these are things that you live. You don't like read about them. Actually, you do need to kind of study them, but you actually need to live them. And then you see the compassion and the wisdom of the Buddha through living these things. And when you take the five lay precepts, you have the opportunity to do that. Every full and new moon, you can renew your precepts. And this is part of this tradition that the Buddha gave us, and which is the other thing I want to say, that we have guidance, and that's so huge. Venerable Children once asked Kinzer Jampa Tekcho, how long do you need a teacher? And he said, all the way to full awakening. So we're always going to need guidance, and we need guidance on a path that's well traveled. And then through that, day by day, step by step, we learn through seeing the advantages and disadvantages of things, what to adopt and what to abandon. And we just keep learning, like refining that. You know, we work with the rock tumbler takes off the big, the big parts first, and then you get down to the little parts, you know. And so that's how it works. You start with your big problems and you work your way to other things. And of course, they all circle around. But through this, we have the opportunity to actually grow and change to get close to some of our potential. Now, my little laptop died this morning, but I had a quote I wanted to read that just, this is more for the people who are studying Precious Garland and just were reading, learning about Shanti David chapter 9. It's from Tsongkhapa, so I'll just have to kind of paraphrase it. Like, I find this inspiring, and I wouldn't have found this inspiring previously. So, I mean, I am interested in the philosophy, but why are we learning all these things about these different traditions that are non-Buddhist and all their different views and this and that? And Tsongkhapa is saying, and it's true for all of our practices, we have to I'm gonna have to just put this in my own words, we have to drench ourselves again and again, wash ourselves again and again with these teachings, because from his point of view, we are actually habituated to these wrong views from previous lifetimes. And what will happen, and I think I've actually seen this, it will come up in one way, shape, or form in the modern day, and you'll see somebody kind of fall away. You know, they want to follow this path, and then they start falling away because they have a lot of predispositions that they kind of lean into for some reason. And this is why he's telling us we have to, again and again, we have to plant these seeds. And he's saying, like, if you try to plant these seeds in a way where you don't like do this repeatedly, and you don't look at these various things that we're trying to refute and trying to understand and apply them to your life, then when you're trying to plant these predispositions, he says it's like planting a dagger in mud. Like, if you ever tried to make something stable in mud, it just flops over. You can't do it. So what he's saying is, by our reflection, by our study, by our practice, we're going to plant predispositions and make those stronger and stronger by doing it again and again, so that we then, next time we meet something, like most of us in this room who are monastics think, I don't think I created the karma to do this in this life. Most of us think that. So we had predispositions. We planted something firmly that then these conditions arose and we were able to respond to that. So this is what's beautiful about monastic life.